when we see all the suffering happening in the world, murdering, this brutal torture, rapes, crime, this sense of question arises in the human mind. Like, what is really the purpose of it?
In the end of the artificial self, one becomes 100% intuitive. Is the vibrancy of life as it is not enough? You know, the vibrancy of that body.
Yeah. So, hi, Christopher.
Hi Shivam, good to
Uh,
be with you.
so, we are going to start this discussion with a short introduction about you, on who are you and what you do, and how should people reach out to you in case they want to.
So in 2008, I had a shift where my sense of identity and also a kind of visceral, energetic sense of self seemed to disappear, seemed to fall away. And what I saw was that when I looked within, I could not find myself as I had previously thought myself to be. So I could not find myself as some kind of separate object or entity or person. And since that time, there's just been a natural, I guess, sort of sharing of that kind of message to try to describe that, because there was no words to describe that really. There was no frame of reference at that time to describe that. So I was left with my own words, what I could describe from what was being seen instantly. And what I found is that people that were going through certain issues in their life and psychological issues, what I saw is that that same sense of identity that was here that disappeared was at play within those people's lives and was really the sort of true cause of their disturbance, if you will. You know, we could
Hmm.
call it the sufferer, the separate self that is sort of feeling like life is happening to it.
Hmm.
And so what I would find is that people would come and end up, we would end up discussing this, and so that became something that seemed to be of some kind of use to facilitate people being able to have some kind of loosening and openness to this and a loosening of that false identity.
Okay, so what you're saying is really interesting. So normally, as humans, we go through our lives with a sense of self, with a sense of subject of our experiences, in the sense of that I, me, who is going through all the experiences of life, that I am enjoying, I am suffering, and so on. This is all happening to me, in the sense that there is a sense of unique identity, a unique sense of self, a localized center in my head or in my body or whatever, who is going through all these experiences. And you are saying that all of the, first of all, you are free from it, and all of the psychological sufferings of the human mind is rooted in this um, sense of identity, which we all seem to have or hallucinate.
There's a subjective. It seems that everybody has this subjective sense of self,
Mm.
and that feels separate from everything else, and like life is happening to it. And there's a kind of inner story and inner dialogue and inner conversation that seems to be
Yeah,
taking place for most people, which ended here,
yeah,
in which there is the one that seems to be suffering what is happening. So the thoughts like I am not worthy, I am not good enough,
yeah.
um, I am a failure. All these kind of thoughts are referring to something, to
Mm.
some personal sense of self. And so it seems like that's the common experience that most people have, that human beings have. As far as we're aware, the animals don't have that. And so this is what I refer to as the artificial self. And
mm,
I call it the artificial self because artificial means man-made. And it's a kind of software. You see, if we go back young enough as a child, life, the totality of life, infinite life can play as anything because it is everything. So it can play as anything. So somehow the body, the human body, the child's body, part of what is playing out is a sense of localized, condensed energy.
mm,
Okay? And that in itself doesn't seem to be an issue, but then what happens is society gives the programming, it gives the like a software. It teaches children to identify with that as who they are, but also to see that as
wow,
something separate. Oh, this body is separate from that body. This body is separate from the tree. Because as it's given all this knowledge and language, that starts to create in the mind all this perception of separation, and it gets tied with that condensed sense of energy. It becomes this kind of psychosomatic experience, and it's kind of like a spring or a coil that's getting more and more tightly wound as the child is
mm,
getting older, as the identity is getting stronger, that energetic visceral sense of separation is getting stronger, and in that experience it can feel as though there is real separation, there is real lack, as if something is lacking, something is missing, something is unfulfilled. A sense of personalized control can be there, like you're the one that has to make everything happen.
yeah,
And also then a sense of time as well, as if there is a past, present, and a future, as if you as a separate entity is kind of moving through time. And so that experience covers, hides what actually is, which is timeless, which is happening of its own accord, which is completely full and complete and abundant, and which is one, where there is no separation. So that experience of the artificial self seems to be the common experience that most human beings have, and it's really at the root of that is the sufferer. That separate sense of self is the sufferer, and so there's all this self-referential thinking, that inner conversation
mm,
made of language that's been passed on from generation to generation, knowledge, words, which are just sounds. Even thoughts are just sounds, but there's a meaning attached to them. And all that seems to be referring to someone, a subject where objects are happening to that subject.
mm, mm, mm.
And so that becomes that experience, and it's really a fictional, a fictional. It's based on a fiction, which is that there is something actually there that is separate from everything else.
Wow. So this self person, which we refer to as I or me in a very self-referential way, this whole thing is an illusion. And it's very interesting that this is also a kind of these things are very similarly said in neuroscience as well, that there is no localized sense of self in your brain anywhere which you can locate or identify as yourself. This arrangement or this sense of being myself, which I feel, which everyone feels to be so personal, is just an arrangement of an energy which can be just rearranged as to something else in like that. So it's really an illusion, and it's just one of the plays of energy um, inside the universe. And what's really a problem is that we as children are taught to identify with it, and that's the root of all psychological problems. And okay, okay, this everything I know about this, Christopher, this sense of self, this identity, is through Indian spirituality. Um, what's generally referred to as moksha or moksha here in India, and that's translated to enlightenment or liberation in English language. So, do you think that's what it is all about, what you are experiencing, or is it something else?
Well, firstly, this is not an experience. It cannot be an experience because experience is generated by that software. And
Hmm.
so, what naturally is occurring cannot be an experience. The experience is just the experience of the artificial self, put together by all of that software, that programming, that knowledge, that conditioning. Um, but and this is also incomparable. It cannot be compared to anything else. You can only compare something separate to something else that's separate. But what we're talking about is something that is actually everything, and so you can't compare everything to anything because it is everything. So, so it really it is incomparable. But obviously, it seems that throughout history there's been beings that have had this kind of falling away of this artificial self, it seems, and so they have described this in different ways based on the language that they had, whether it's the Christians that talked about salvation, or
Hmm.
the Hindus that talk about moksha, or Buddhists that talk about nirvana, or the Gnostics that talk about gnosis. They all have the different, terms for this, and but there is there is nothing that is really called those things. There is nothing really that is called liberation. There is nothing really that is called salvation. They're just words trying to point to something. And what they're really
Hmm.
pointing to is that which cannot be seen by the artificial self because it's in a bubble of its own experience, which is a
Hmm.
dualistic experience, which is an artificial experience. And so it misses the natural way of things. It misses what naturally is, which cannot be something that it can think of in its mind, and it cannot be a word, you know.
Okay.
So all of these things can just are just kind of pointing to that. I use the word liberation. You
Hmm.
could use the word freedom.
Hmm.
It's just pointing to something. It's saying really
Yeah.
the absence. It's the absence of that artificial self. In the absence of the artificial self, what remains you can't really say.
Hmm.
It is a
Right.
mystery. It is a
Right.
mystery, but it's not a mystery that is somewhere else other than right here.
Right. So it's just a concept to teach to the artificial mind, to the human mind, that because it thinks itself to be so limited, um, there is something such as liberation. Just for the mind to understand um, a concept which cannot really be understood by the mind. So it's a pointer against what its own experiences are, towards breaking those limitations, towards breaking those experiences. Is that right?
You see, there is no way to liberation. There is no method, there is no teaching, there is no practice, there is no process, there is no way to liberation beyond even the word liberation, right? Which just
Hmm.
means freedom. Freedom from the artificial self, freedom from the illusion, the fiction um, of that, which is a particular kind of experience, a dualistic experience. Um, but there can be a loosening of that artificial self. There can be an opening to this mystery, and there can be some methods and ways that can allow a little bit of an opening to that, that can sort of loosen and undermine and expose the artificial self and the things that the artificial self believes to be true, its experience.
Hmm. So, what really could be the purpose of all this? Like, why would energy, like, why would the universe exist in the way it exists and the purpose of life in the way we experience it? Why would this energy take this form of a separate identity and then, for the lack of better words, eventually be free from it? Like, isn't that a closed loop to some extent, to become this constriction and then free from it? Because the way I look at is that many people yearn towards this liberation. It's the common goal for all religions to in some extent. So they're all pointing to the same direction, to be free from it or to realize this truth. So why do you think that this falsehood or this constriction even exists in the first place? Like, why would this happen in this universe? Why would the universe exist? Why would we be born? That's a question in a lot of our minds.
Well, the first thing to say is that life is not plain as a separate self, because there is really no separate self. That is a complete and total fiction. But there can be the experience as if there is one. There can be the sense
Hmm.
that there is one. The child has that condensed sense of energy, a localized sense of energy, a kind of here-ness, but that's not separation. That's like a wave that is, seems to be doing its own thing, but is really just the ocean itself. But then
Hmm.
it's the language, it's the programming, it's the generational software that's passed on
Hmm.
that then says that I am separate, that says I am lacking something, just because there is that particular kind of sense there. There is a sense of localization which is then misperceived to be actual separation, to be actual lack, you know, when it's
Okay.
not. That's the nature of an illusion. That's what an illusion is. An illusion is something that appears to be a certain way when it is not that way at all. Just like the classic example of walking down a darkened street and you see what appears to be a snake coiled up. But when you
Hmm.
come back in the morning when it's light, you see
Hmm.
that what appeared to be a coiled up snake was actually just a coiled up piece of rope. It
Yeah.
was never a snake. It was never ever a snake, even though the person thought that it was a snake and
Hmm.
it created the emotion of fear because they thought it was
Hmm.
a snake. So there can be the
Hmm.
experience that it was a snake and the experience of fear, but that doesn't mean that there really was a snake, you
Yeah.
see? So in the very same way, there can be the experience as if there is separation, that there is a separate self, there is a me, there is an I. There can be emotions that come from that,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean that there really is an actual separate self or I there, you see? But that's what the artificial self believes. Of course, it believes that it is real, that it is separate, and so that then means that when it looks out, it thinks that everything else is real and everything else is separate and everything else is lacking. And it thinks that it's in control, has personal control, and it thinks that there are other separate people that have personal control. And it thinks that there is time, past and future, and the present. That's its experience. But that doesn't mean that it's based on what really is,
Hmm.
you see.
Yeah. Classic.
And in terms of the question
Yeah.
why all of this? Well,
Yeah.
that is also part of that is a question that the artificial self asks because it's trying to look for some kind of meaning and purpose to things because it feels as though something's lacking. So it has to try to create something more about itself and more about life because it's not satisfied and can't really actually see or sense what actually is. So it can't sense the enormity of this instant, this timeless instant, life as it is, the infinity of life. It can't sense that. So it has to try to create some kind of alternative meaning out of it that seems to be better than what it is experiencing, that seems to be mundane and boring and lacking
Okay.
something, you see? So so it's looking for something more. So that's what the artificial self asks. The animals As far as we're aware, they don't ask that question of why. You know, it's like saying, why does the bird fly?
Mm.
You know, what's its purpose? Why does it fly? Well, the bird just does what it does. That's just what the bird does. It flies.
Okay.
You see, so that body does what that body does, this body does what this body does. Why does there have to be some purpose? The artificial self projects itself onto everything.
Uh,
So the way that most humans think through the artificial self is to think in human terms. This idea of why is is a human question or a human perception, as if there is some kind of human type God or something that
mm.
has a plan, that has determined that this is the meaning of life.
Mm.
But also, uh, you know, if you say that there is a purpose, if somebody says that there is a purpose, let's say somebody says, my purpose is to achieve this particular goal. That's my life purpose. That's the purpose of life, or the purpose of my life. Well, then what happens when they achieve that goal? Now they've got to create another purpose. And then
Yeah.
when they achieve that one, they've got to create another purpose and another purpose.
Yeah.
And life is never going to say, that's the purpose of life, what you've decided. If you say
Mm.
this is the purpose of life, you're not going to get confirmation from life to agree that yes, that's what you think is the purpose of life, is the actual purpose of life, is the actual purpose of the universe. So it can never be known. It could never be known even if there was a purpose. But purpose is the idea of something in the future. Is that you've got to get to some place, that there's some destination greater than this, you know. And it all goes back to that sense that the artificial self has, the sense that was taught into it from a young age of trying to become something more and have something more. I remember myself as a child in the education system from a young age being taught to ask that question and to think, what do I want to be when I grow up, and what do I want to achieve or become or do when I grow up? And as a child, before those questions, before you entertain those questions and believe those questions, you're simply right where you are. You're simply enjoying whatever is taking place. There's
Mm.
not a thought of that. There's not a thought of the next moment becoming something more or having something more, because those questions actually imply that there is something lacking, that this moment is lacking, and that what you are is lacking in some way. And so the moment that the child believes that, which is part of this software that it takes on, this kind of mind matrix software, the moment it believes that, it starts to, it cannot see and enjoy what is. It starts to chase something else, which is
Mm.
really in its imagination. It's just
Yeah.
an image in its head, an ideal in its head, a projection, and then that becomes the sole focus. And that's what the artificial self is living in. It's in this story that is trying to move into the future based on a false sense of purpose. Why does anything need to have any purpose?
Mm.
Is the vibrancy of life as it is not enough? You know, the vibrancy of that body, or the
Mm.
countless things that are happening in that body right now, cells regenerating, neurons firing off in the brain, blood pumping, food digesting, the countless things that are taking place. It's pure life, pure aliveness, full of aliveness, full of life. Why does something more have to be added to it, which would only really distort it? And that's what the artificial self does when it keeps thinking in terms of purpose, 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 as if there is something outside of this that has determined some kind of purpose, something outside of it in the past that has decided some kind of purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
What you start to see when as the artificial self loosens and as the artificial self disappears, the whole idea of some kind of set purpose becomes ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, classic.
And that's the only
Cla-
way that there is a playfulness. then playfulness comes when there is no sense of purpose. Purpose means like there's a seriousness to it because there's a goal. I got to get somewhere. I got to achieve something. It
mm,
becomes serious, and it's time bound in the future. But when that is no more, there is a playfulness in what timelessly and immediately is. There can be
mm,
this can be enjoyed.
mm. This reminds me of a conversation I had and with my college friend during my college days, because I was so much thinking about this question obsessively. I was eventually depressed over it because there was some kind of dissatisfaction which I was really looking for, the purpose of life in general, which created this pattern, of me thinking about the purpose of life. And there is a discussion I had. I think I saw some video of this somewhere, or the discussion I had was that the concept of purpose is really a man-made concept. It's there in the human mind. It's there due to evolution, because the evolutionary purpose of this is to just let humans feel more motivated to do something because they want to survive, they want to adapt to the surroundings. If I want to, let's say, earn more money, I have to work harder. And which, so essentially, why am I working harder is to earn more money. The purpose is to earn money, and hence, therefore, I am working harder. So this really, the purpose is inside of our human mind, and which cannot really be applied to the source. The universe is the source of the sense of purpose which we are feeling and having. So the sense of purpose cannot be really applied to the universe. The universe is the source of that feeling. um, so it's really a pointless question. And yes, as you said, the classic Sadhguru quote, like if one purpose is fulfilled, then that will create another purpose. Like, why would that purpose be? That purpose will have another purpose. That then purpose will have another purpose, and so on. It will go on to infinite regression. And that really helped me a lot, during my initial search days when I explored Sadhguru. Is really special to me, and a lot of these Indian gurus are special to me because they about a lot, talked about it a lot, which really helped me. But I think this question about purpose of life becomes important, Christopher, because when we see all the suffering happening in the world, um, this murdering, this brutal torture, rapes, crime, this sense of people dominating over each other, killing each other, hurting each other, raping each other, and so on. This really pains my heart and pains everyone's heart. And the sense of question arises in the human mind, like, what is really the purpose of it? Why would, if it is what you're saying, that life is just playing, as it is just in the nature of life to play with all these energies. Is like, why would anyone or anything subject itself to all the horrors of the pain and suffering which we see in the world? Like, why would it do that? You know, this question becomes really important when we
Mm.
see that.
Again, the question often is coming through that from a lens, through the lens of a separate self, through a
Mm,
separate human self, because it looks at it through that kind of. It says, why would I choose this? Why would I, But life is not. There's not some kind of human mind behind the universe that is thinking in
mm,
that way. You see, again, this is again the way the artificial self is projecting its own experience onto everything.
yeah.
Um, so life doesn't need some kind of additional meaning or purpose to it, other than what is just happening itself, the bare essential nature of life itself, being able to play as anything. And part of the play of the universe is that things are created, things are preserved, and things are
Mm,
destroyed. And that is the cycle, because if you don't have destruction, deconstruction, you can't have something new that's created. If you don't have
okay.
preservation, then things are created and they're burnt out very quickly. If you don't have creation, then nothing new comes. So all these three modes in the play of life have to happen. There has to be creation, preservation, destruction. Creation, preservation, destruction. That cycle has to happen. So what brings about destruction? Everything is being destroyed in some way, shape or form. That body is dying.
mm,
Cells are dying, and then new
mm,
cells are being born. And then those cells are being preserved for amount of time, and then they die, and then more cells are born. That is the nature, that's the cycle of things, you know. But so much of the, and that's not an issue, is that an issue in itself? That's just the way things are. But what turns it into an issue is the artificial self and how it says something is wrong, something is good, or something is bad. Something is right, something is wrong, something is good, something is bad. And that's its own projection based on what it's been taught, based on the software that it's been given in society, whether that's come from religion.
mm.
So much of the morals have come from religion. This is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad.
Yeah.
And but when in the absence of the artificial self, one is freed from those fictional dualities of right, wrong, good, and bad, and life is just seen for what it really is, which is that there is destruction, there is creation, and there is preservation, and life cannot continue without those things.
Mm,
That's just the nature of form, the play of form. It has to be that way, otherwise you can't have form in that way. Forms have to seem to decay, so something is new, new is created. Then it has to be preserved for a while, and the cycle goes on. You
okay.
know. But so the suffering really, the suffering is not happening in life itself. There is pain in life itself as well as pleasure in life itself. There is destruction as well as creation and preservation. But suffering, that is happening at the source of the artificial self. The artificial self is the source of inner suffering, psychological suffering. It's the one that suffers. It is the sufferer. But
Mm-hmm.
when the artificial self comes to an end, what goes along with that is the sufferer, therefore suffering. But does that mean there'll be no pain? Does that mean there'll be no pleasure? No, those will continue. Does that mean there'll be no creation? Does that mean there'll be no destruction? No, those will
Okay.
continue.
So that destruction will be all the that would include all the murders and crimes and torturing each other, which is happening around the world. That destruction, that all things are that part of destruction, which is eventually the part of all this cycle of creation and destruction, which is happening to sustain the illusion of form, which we are seeing. And that destruction is happening in, for example, my body as well, that all the cells are individually getting destroyed, which I don't feel bad about. There are no cells which are reporting to me that, hey, Shivam, why did you kill me? Because there is no psychological sufferer over there. And what essentially is the problem here is that there is a psychological sufferer sitting in our minds, which is reporting all the bad happenings. It is judging things to be good or bad, and then it's reporting or complaining that, okay, yeah, why is this happening to me, and this shouldn't really happen. That is essentially the whole confusion on why this question arises.
The artificial self cannot accept, is not willing to accept the totality of life. It's it wants to judge and say something is good, something is bad, something is right, something is wrong.
Mm,
It cannot include everything because it feels separate. So it has to keep certain things away. It cannot include everything.
mm,
Um,
right,
but so much of what is happening, the murder, different things that happen, are generally often a product of that artificial self. The fact that people feel like they are an artificial
correct.
self,
Yeah.
and so it goes beyond survival. If there is a need for survival, then this is what has to maybe happen. Just like the animals survive by doing those things. That's part of the cycle of things. If, as human beings once were in history, when everything was based fully on survival, then that might have been something necessary to happen. But so much of what happens now is not based on on survival, it's based on ideology. It's based on belief. It's based on identity. And that's all coming from that artificial self.
mm,
These are the divides, right? It's one person's belief system versus another person's belief system. It's one person's ideology versus another person's ideology. That's what pits people against each other,
mm.
and the illusion what of the artificial self and what the artificial self believes, and how that then gets projected onto other people and to life circumstances and in society. Causes so much of these issues. If you took that away, if the artificial self was not there, so much of that um, carnage would disappear, and only what would be absolutely necessary for survival would remain present.
So then, why would the artificial self exist? Like, what is the need of sustaining this form, sustaining this entire illusion of form? It's just the way things are.
Why not? Why does there have to, again, this goes back to purpose. What is the purpose? What is
Yeah,
the
yeah,
reason?
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
why can it not just play as whatever it is playing as? Why can it not just experience, I'm using that word lightly, experience a multiplicity of different things? Because really there's no one there to actually get hurt. That's the illusion
There
that the
are
artificial.
people. There are people being. There are people who are suffering and feeling the pain and shouting and screaming. So, like, why not does the life listen to those things? I mean, in evolution also, um, which is the subset of this life, it eventually improves, right? So why not the life itself, which is playing as all these things which you are saying? Why not it does listen to these cries and improves itself? Like why does had to keep continuing?
It goes back to like we've just been saying about destruction and creation. This is part of
Hmm.
the unfolding. So if the universe is seeming to expand and evolve in terms of its complexity, then it's got to go through those processes of some form of destruction, deconstruction, and then creation and then preservation. It has to go
Hmm.
through that. Now, that will
Hmm.
happen regardless, or always will happen. But the suffering that's experienced, the true suffering, not pain, because pain is not the real suffering we're speaking of here, we're talking about psychological, emotional, is through that illusion of the artificial self. If the artificial self is not there, which I'm suggesting it is not there, but yet there seems to be the experience that it is, because there is uh, somehow that is being held, um, then it will seem as though everything that's happening is happening to it, and that is why it
Hmm.
suffers. And so that is turmoil, that is agony. But pain is not. The animals feel pain. It's quite possible to feel pain and to not suffer. They're not the same thing, they're not the exact thing. They're two different things. One is a sensation, one is the artificial self, a separate sense of self that is taking it personally, that is psychologically and emotionally suffering it. This is happening to me. Why is this happening to me? It's all the questions that it asks itself. If there was just the sensation of pain, what is the problem with that? It's the story around that. Why is this happening to me? What's taking place here? I don't like this. I wish this would stop. How long is this going to go on for? That story, that is the pain, that is the real pain. That is the suffering.
But then even without those thoughts and suffering, the pain is taking place, right? So you mentioned animals. So animals also do feel pain and then they scream and then they cry also. They definitely they seem to be appear to be in agony, and they do in some sense play to stop, you know.
Mm.
So then how is that
The
not
pain is
true
taking
that they are suffering as well,
the pain
and
is
that
not
pain is the suffering?
the pain is not taking place for anybody. There's no one there. There is just pain happening for no one. But in the illusion of the artificial self, when the pain happens, it takes it to be happening to it. That's the dream. That's the illusion. That's the fiction. And so that then causes all the issue
So
that is
animals don't
experienced.
have it. So animals don't have this center, that this is happening to me, that this sense of.
As far as we're aware, they don't seem to have, because they've probably not got the same brain capacity that the human being has to have that kind of more complex experience. But also, they've not received all of the software
Hmm.
that the human being does, which is passed on from generation to
But
generation, which is all
yeah,
these attributed meanings and language. But the pain is there, of course. The animal, if it experiences pain, it moves away from the pain. But the pain is not happening to anybody that's separate.
but then there
It's
is
just
a
it's the
reaction.
totality of life. It's the totality of life as an animal with pain.
But then there is a reaction going on in animals and humans of crying and screaming and all this. So what
It's
that
just a physical reaction, which is
what's
neither right
happening?
nor it's neither right nor wrong. It's just what's naturally occurring. But
Okay.
that's what's impossible for that's what the artificial self cannot accept. It can't accept what's just naturally occurring. It
Hmm.
has to say it's either good or bad or right or wrong. A volcano that explodes, is that good or is it bad? It's part of nature. It's doing something. It's releasing energy
Hmm,
that
hmm,
needs
hmm.
to be released. If that energy was not released through the volcano, it would be released somewhere else.
Okay. So I would
So
like
the
to.
so the pain that comes up is being released.
Hmm, right. I would like to think that animals, or especially some large animals, may have a sense of self, even though it is very immature compared to what we as humans have. But then, what you are essentially saying is that that's not really a problem. It is the process of associating meaning to that pain, and then having these thoughts as to why it's happening to me. This should stop. That is the real suffering, which is really happening. That is what we must stop as human beings or animals. That is the thing. That is the root cause of the actual suffering which we are feeling. That's the actual problem.
Well, no, we don't have to. No one has to stop it. But if somebody feels as though they want to stop it, then they
Hmm.
will choose to try to stop it.
So
But as
how to
but
stop
as
it? Like you
far as
mentioned, there are. Hmm.
but as far as the infinite's concerned, that's it's based on an illusion.
Hmm.
The suffering is based on illusion, which is that there is something there that's not actually there, that is the sufferer of what's happening.
So how
That's that added bit of software that's coming. That's the artificial self, man-made.
hmm. So how would one stop that suffering? Let's say somebody is feeling all these things, and they are fed up with this sense of self. Even all these thoughts about suffering in the world is suffering in some sense. Like if even if I'm thinking about other people's suffering, that is also a suffering in some sense. So how would one stop feeling like this? Because you mentioned there are no really ways or practical steps to freedom. So then, how would one ensure that the likelihood of liberation being happening is increased?
They can still be thinking of others suffering. There can still be
Oh,
compassion. There can be
okay,
empathy.
okay.
But it's just that that's not. It's just not being done by someone. There's not someone there
Oh,
that's happening to. That's the only difference. But they can, of course, there's still compassion can still be there, empathy can still be there, helping others can still be there.
Hmm.
It's just that there's not the illusion that there is something separate there that is helping something else that's separate, you see.
Hmm.
But in terms of how can that, suffering come to an end, the only way the suffering comes to an end is when the sufferer
Hmm.
disappears, when the sufferer is seen to not be, right? To not be real. And that's what liberation is. But there's no way to liberation, there's no method to liberation, there's no teaching, there's no practice, there's no process. Because actually, the thing that seems to disappear is already not there. But what can seem to happen is that there can be a kind of opening to what actually is, and there can be a loosening of that artificial self, an undermining of the artificial self, the ideas that it's got, the beliefs that it's got, the belief and sense of separation and lack and illusory personal control and time. Those things can be undermined, and that can then loosen that identity, and there can be an opening to this timeless fact. But essentially, the sufferer doesn't come to an end, and so the suffering doesn't fully come to an end until liberation. That's the freedom from suffering, the freedom from separation.
Hmm. Okay. Um, when we really were talking in another discussion before, I think you brought up a really interesting teaching about intuition, which I'm trying to follow, on how to recognize your true intuition or the true voice of intuition. So could you please elaborate more on that? Like how, what exactly is intuition and how to live by that and why is that important?
Well, essentially, you could say, three different sort of guidance systems. There's the instinct, which
Mm.
of course is sort of tied into the bodily level. There is the intellect, which of
Mm.
course is the more mental level. And then there is the intuition, which is something that's more energetic. So that energetic level is something that is more, you could say, closely tied with the totality, whereas the intellect can be conditioned,
Mm.
and the instinct is also more tied to just purely the physical organism, the
Mm.
survival of the physical organism. So the instinct is all about survival of the physical organism. The intellect that's been conditioned can often be about survival, but also pleasure seeking, control,
Mm.
and but the intuition is an intelligence that has not been conditioned, so it's beyond the instinctual level, it's beyond the intellect level, and somehow it, because it is like the reading of energy, it can sort of read the bigger picture of things. It's sensing the way that things are, making having guidance based on that, as opposed to guidance from the intellect and from the
Mm.
instinct. And so a way that you can kind of tell the difference between what is intuition, instinct, and the intellect. The instinct is, again, purely for survival. So a lot of what comes out of the instinct is based in that need to survive. A lot of what
Mm.
comes out of the intellect is based on what it's afraid of. So when it looks around, it processes, the intellect processes all the information that's available, and it says either I don't want this or I do want this. So that's fear and desire. And so the intellect often makes decisions based on, it's kind of like mathematics. It's like playing a game of chess. It
Mm.
says, okay, if I make this move, then this is
Mm.
what will happen. And then if I
mm,
make that move, then that's what will happen.
mm,
Whereas the instinct is like a reaction. It's a reaction in the moment for
right.
some survival purpose.
Mm,
The intellect can think more in terms of past and future based on the information that it has. But the intuition is something that is in the timeless, is is in this instant, and it's reading, naturally reading the energetics of this moment, you could say. And so then
mm,
it's making a so-called decision based on that. It's a different kind of guidance. It can see the bigger picture, and so it comes as more of a whole energetic sense of something.
mm,
So if something feels right, this feels right. It might not be able to explain why that is. There's no fear,
yeah. Mm,
because it's not about survival necessarily. It's not coming from fear, and it's not coming from a desire for something.
mm,
It's just simply the reading of what is. And so often a whole body movement will come to an impulse to move in a certain direction, and there might be no rationale behind it, no logical reasoning behind it, but it just
mm,
feels
mm,
right. But so much of that is buried because, of course, the artificial self often functions through the intellect,
mm.
and so it often blocks instinct and it blocks intuition, and instead it goes based on the intellect and how that's been programmed and conditioned.
Right. So how does one distinguish between intellect and intuition?
The intuition comes out of a full sense of aliveness.
Mm,
It's more like coming out of a stopping, more out of a stillness, more out of a silence, an aliveness. Whereas the intellect is, again, like you've just described, it's like playing chess. So it's
yeah.
overthinking, it's
Yeah.
thinking and projecting and imagining and remembering. That's how it's making its decision, because what it's doing, the intellect, is making decision based on information that it has, that it's gathered.
Mm,
Whereas the intuition is not making a decision based on information, or at least not intellectual information. It's based on what it's reading in the moment, what's coming through, what the totality wants. The
mm,
ocean is communicating to the wave what it wants. It's a natural intelligence. It's a natural intelligence. Um, so you will, and it's out of this immediacy, out of this moment, out of the instant, as opposed to where the intellect is operating through time, past, present, future. So as soon as you go into that, you know that that's not the intuition. The intuition will come out of that aliveness. It will come out of that kind of stillness, that silence, that, you know,
mm,
natural presence. And it will feel like a strong impulse where you might have no particular rationale behind it, no logical rationale behind it.
mm.
You just feel like this is the way you
Yeah.
must go. And people around you might say you're crazy
Yeah.
for following that, because to them they're operating also through the intellect. So they're looking
Mm,
at, well, yeah, but this doesn't seem to make sense because this would probably happen and that would happen. But
mm.
something deeper is saying it's that. And the more that you go with that, actually, it proves itself to you. Because
Yeah.
every time you follow it, it always leads in the, the
Right.
right direction, which is the best for all
Correct.
concerned. The wave
Correct.
will go in the wave will go in the direction that is best for the whole of the ocean.
Yeah. Yeah. It sort of sometimes feel as if that it eventually freed you up, like you are not really in control of that decision. Let the ocean take that decision, and it eventually always surprises me that, oh, okay, I couldn't have ever thought of this consequence happening. But yeah, because I took that decision out of intuition, this happened, which always amazes me. It doesn't really happen often, but yeah, a lot of times when I have to take a decision, I do end up, trying to analyze that, okay, which part of my self should I listen to? And it's really a big thing inside the human world itself, right? To be able to tap into your intuition more and more, because everybody does seem to recognize the power of intuition.
If you're walking down a street and a car comes flying down the road, your
Yeah,
intellect's going to be too slow for that. The intuition's probably going to be too slow for that in that moment.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So the intellect, sorry, the
yeah.
instinct will kick
Instinct.
in. So you jump out the way. What the
Correct.
intuition will do, though, is probably make sure you're not crossing that road in the first place or at that time.
Yeah, yeah,
Right? You see, that's the intuition. You'll be in the right place at the right time
yeah,
because it's an energy. It's magnetic.
yeah.
You're being moved by
Correct,
the energetic forces of life, which is what it
correct,
really is. You know.
correct, correct. Yeah. Instinct is there just in case you didn't listen to intuition before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so how does one learn to do that? How does one learn to follow their heart more and more, follow their intuition more and more? What
There's a
practices do
saying.
they follow?
There's a saying. The quieter you become, the more you can hear. So in the end of the artificial self, one becomes 100% intuitive.
Hmm.
100% intuitive when the artificial self
Right.
is no more. But up until that point, the artificial self, as it loosens, one becomes more intuitive. Not 100% intuitive, but more intuitive. You see?
Hmm. Hmm.
So how to loosen it? More silence, more stillness, less thinking,
And how does
less restlessness, less busyness.
so
Step
how
out of the
does one do
mind.
that? How does
Step out
one
of the
do
mind.
that?
Stop
How
everything.
does one?
Stop
Okay.
everything. Step out of the mind. Feel the aliveness of this moment. Think no thought for a few moments and feel the aliveness of this moment.
Hmm.
And in the aliveness of this moment, no thoughts, there is an instant of stillness,
Right.
silence. Now you can hear. Now you can sense. Now you can listen. Now that impulse can come through.
Hmm. Right.
The more, and then as you repeat that, you create more gaps. You interrupt the flow of the artificial self with its constant self-referential thinking.
Hmm.
So you're in these, you're creating more space, more gaps of stillness, of no thinking. That's how you loosen, or one way of loosening that um, the noise of the artificial self. You interrupt the flow, the mechanical flow of the artificial self. And then in that moment, you can hear, you can listen. The impulse can come through. It's because what the artificial self is like, it's like an interference pattern. It's an artificial frequency blocking the natural frequency.
Hmm. Okay.
That body has a natural frequency. Life has a natural frequency. Everything has a natural frequency.
Hmm.
The natural intelligence has a kind of natural frequency to it.
So
So the
so do
more
you,
you get into the groove of that natural frequency by getting out of the artificial frequency of
hmm.
the artificial self, then the more you're going to be able to listen and hear that symphony playing, you know,
Hmm.
so you can get in line with the music.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you think that there are any practices or any lifestyle changes which one can do to loosen up this artificial self more towards the goal of towards this goal of spirituality or listening to their intuition and so on? Is there
Anything that
anything
relaxes the
you can
nervous
see?
system, anything that
Ah,
relaxes the nervous system. Uh, there's so many with meditation, anything that
hmm,
gets you out of the mind,
good,
exposing, debasing false beliefs that the
hmm,
artificial self has
hmm,
of time, of separation, of lack of personal control, of its judgments of good, bad, right, and wrong.
hmm,
So loosening belief systems, um, identities, less thoughts, relaxing the nervous system. And there's so many ways to do these types of things: meditation, yoga, tai chi,
yeah,
martial
yeah,
arts,
yeah,
walking, exercise, art, being creative, dancing. Um, there's so many ways to loosen the artificial self and create potentially some opening, some openness, and some are more significant than others. But um, that will create an interruption in that flow of the artificial self, this mechanical flow.
right, yeah. I think my own meditation journey has been so far great. Eventually, some 10 years ago, I had this great calling towards, trying to discover this purpose of life question about myself. And I eventually ended up in some of the meditation camps where I felt this immense sense of bliss, which is absolutely incomparable to anything else. Although that experience has gone far back beyond in time, but yeah, that eventually just evaporated all the questions away about purpose of life and things in general. And the sense of bliss was so much that I could have traded anything to get 1 second more of that bliss. So yeah, it's definitely more beneficial towards relaxing the nervous system and feeling the joy within and having that sense of peace and calm. And then that eventually helps us to discover this power of intuition, which we are talking about, and help make those informed decisions.
Mm.
So yeah,
The ultimate
this
liberation, 100% is the ultimate intuition. 100% is liberation. But up until
hmm,
that point, there can be some loosening, which increases more of that intuition, access
hmm,
to that intuition, so to speak,
yeah,
which is a very natural, simple thing, actually.
hmm, okay. So
It's
how
just that
does
it's just that
yeah,
so much of that stuff that's been passed on the software, you know,
right,
interferes with it.
right. So how does one choose which method to follow? Like there are multiple methods towards attaining this goal.
Mm.
So how does one choose which method to follow and which method to follow? Even in Hindu spirituality, I mean, yes, eventually there is no method or goal or practice towards this, but in Hindu spirituality and other spirituality as well, there are a lot of systems in place in order to help facilitate that. That there is a
Mm-hmm.
path of knowledge, there is a path of action, there is a path of meditation and yoga, pranayam. There is a path of following your guru towards whatever is required. There are a lot of systems in place. Towards the path of bhakti, uh, and in general, all the traditions present in the world. You know, there's a path of Christianity. I would say Christian mysticism and so on, which eventually leads on to this thing. So, how does one decide which path or which method to follow? Even though eventually there is no method, but then there is some system to connect with and to be more inclined towards this kind of thing. How does one choose that?
Well, the short answer would be whatever resonates. The resonance is that is the sensing of energy. That is moving in the direction of what feels most um,
Hmm.
right. But resonance changes based on one's level of understanding
Hmm.
often. So to understand the bigger picture of what is it you're moving in the direction of. So to understand the bigger picture of liberation and the artificial self will help to rearrange the understanding of what then will resonate most to use as a way of and opening, loosening the artificial self and opening to um, this mystery.
Okay.
So to go with that, to go with what truly resonates. So to have context,
Hmm.
right? Because someone might just go and have a massage and
Hmm.
relax the body that way.
Right.
But is that exposing the artificial self in any way? No.
Hmm.
Is that looking to open to what really is? No. So there are things that you can do to relax the nervous
Hmm.
system, other things, but they're not necessarily within the context of a certain sort of direction you move in, and I say that obviously loosely. So it's picking those right things that align with that context of where you're trying to move in the direction of,
Hmm. Okay.
and then working with those things which will loosen the artificial self and open you to life as it really is.
Right. Right.
So that tends to be these kinds of methods like meditation, inquiry, yoga, things of that nature that are relaxing the nervous system and bringing you back to something that is more essentially in the real,
Hmm.
out of the thinking and the programming of the mind that just seems to hide what really is,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. So what I really think is that all these things of intuition and spirituality in general, even when one tries to follow these things, the mind eventually tries to stop and kind of becomes very afraid of the progress which can happen with it, and it eventually sometimes interrupts the flow of progressing in this path. Isn't that true?
Essentially, yeah, the artificial self fears its own disappearance
Yeah.
because, right,
Yeah.
it fears its own annihilation, its undermining because it believes it's real. It can't imagine life without itself there.
Mm.
It can't imagine life without personal control, it controlling
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
So it's going to do everything. It's going to fight to try to maintain itself because deep down it's afraid and it feels threatened as it's being exposed.
Mm.
So often it will self sabotage.
Mm.
So it will come up with some stories
Yeah.
of and reasons why you can't do this, you can't do that, this is not working, that's not working. Anything to try to stop you from basically exposing it.
Mm.
So yeah, fear can come, doubt can come, but that's where, in terms of loosening and opening, there has to be a
Mm.
trust in the a trust in the methods, a trust in where you're generally moving in the direction of, a
Mm,
trust in what you really want, a trust in that yearning,
ah, yeah,
you see, a trust in the resonance.
yeah. It's definitely very enlightening. And I do lack a sense of discipline in order to do that regularly, so that it does not really bring about a permanent shift in my psychology, in terms of behavior, in terms of sense of freedom, peace, calm, and so on. But then it has brought about so many amazing experiences that it's just impossible to imagine my life without it. So yeah, it's really something. It's definitely something. Yeah. And so, have you gone through or read any of spiritual gurus or meditation masters like Osho or Aaron Watts or Buddha or anyone?
So I've taken inspiration from all kinds of different places and
Mm,
uh, people and teachers. There's all kinds of wisdom, but essentially, this when that shift took place, there was no words for that. It was incomparable. You can't compare it to anything. Um, but afterwards, of course, there seemed to be certain maybe people, certain teachers, maybe certain systems that seemed to be pointing to something similar
right.
that took place. And so yeah, I'm familiar with many different teachers, saints, sages, masters. There's always inspiration that you can take from all these, and some things that may help. What happened here is that was not needed because what happened just happened. But for many, those things can be very useful to loosen again that artificial self and to have an opening um, to this.
Right. Right. Uh,
So if something resonates, then obviously um, whoever said that, take what you need and discard the rest, isn't it?
mm, yeah. Do you have any favorites? Any person you refer to in your spiritual journey, or maybe towards teaching some of those concepts? Do you have any favorites among all the gurus or teachers?
I don't know if favourites would be the right word, but there's many that
Mm,
obviously, like I said, have resonated. Could
mm,
name many, you know, Ramana Maharishi, Osho,
okay. Okay.
uh, Neem Karoli Baba,
Right.
Ananda Mayama,
Mm,
um,
okay.
Socrates,
Okay.
uh, Lazu.
Mm, mm, right.
There's so many, many of the Zen masters, Dogon, uh,
Mm,
so many, that you could name that have Bodhidharma, that have key insights into things. Obviously, the Buddha,
mm,
Krishna. There's so many. Jesus Christ.
mm,
There's so
right.
much that you can take um, that can be used as a teaching or a pointer or a method, a way to loosen and a way to open. But
Right.
ultimately, for liberation, like I say, there is no teaching, there is no process, there is no way, there is no method.
Mm. And why do you think that all these teachings do appear to be so radically different from each other? For example, the teaching of Jesus Christ appear very different to what Buddha taught, for example, or what Osho taught, maybe, for example. And eventually, among these religions or spiritual traditions, eventually the difference becomes so vast that they eventually end up fighting against each other, you know. So why
Mm.
do you think it sounds very different, and those differences creates this animosity and hatred among different religious groups and different the followers of different gurus, you know, for example. Why do you think that happens, and why do they have so different teachings if they are pointing to same thing?
You see, the masters never have a problem. They
Mm,
never have a problem.
mm.
Um, it's always the people that come afterwards that
Yeah,
try to interpret what the masters said, and
yeah,
then they get identified with a certain position or with a certain person, with a certain methodology, um, and it often gets twisted and turned from what it originally was. You
mm,
know, Christ was not a Christian, Buddha was not a Buddhist. You know, so it's what came afterwards, which is still the artificial self that tries to twist it and turn it into something that it perceives. And then it makes it either good, bad, right, or wrong, and so it makes something else good, bad, right, or wrong. So then it
mm,
becomes a battle. Well, my truth is the right truth, my way is the right
mm,
way, your way is the wrong way. My God is the right
mm.
God, your God is the wrong God.
Yeah,
Um, that's the age-old story, isn't it, within humanity of this kind of conflict and division. But it's all coming from the artificial self. It never comes from a being that sees clearly,
mm,
what you might call an awakened being, what you might call a master. That they never have a problem.
mm,
They realize that the words are not it.
mm.
You know,
Right,
like it says in the Tao, the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. You know,
right, right.
so they know that it's the words are just words. It's just a certain expression. The words are not important. They're just pointings at best, or
Mm,
they're a way of undermining or destroying the illusion, destroying debasing the artificial self in some way.
correct.
You
Right.
know, so there's no contradiction for them. There's no good or bad for them. You know.
Yeah, awesome. I I currently am, you know, going to an organization called as Art of Living, which is being run by um, Gurudev Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, where he does teach about all this spiritual concepts, the concepts in Vedas, and in general, yoga and meditation philosophy. Well, I do see some problems in the organization as far as commercialization is concerned, and some of the bluff or some of the things which happens. But then, yeah, I do find their yoga and meditation programs very helpful. So I am eventually trying one of those techniques in my journey. So yeah, let's see where that goes. And yeah,
Very good.
eventually I find you to be very helpful in in some of your sessions and some of your videos on your YouTube channel as well. I think that was very insightful and practical. So yeah, so do you do any retreats, Christopher, for your students? I'm sure you must do them. It's incredibly useful.
Yeah, we run
Mm.
some retreats. We have the next one coming up on 21st of September in the UK. That's a
Yeah.
5-day
Oh,
retreat.
okay.
And really, the retreats are probably one of the best opportunities to discuss liberation in depth,
Yeah.
to also work with subtle methods for loosening the artificial self and having an opening, becoming more open, being in a more open state for this. Because you've got 5 days to really immerse yourself in that. And it's not just what is said or the methods themselves, but it's the energy. It's there's a because essentially this is energetic that we're speaking of. It's about energy, and so when you come into an environment with a kind of intensity, a certain amount of time and intensity in a shared space with others that are also have that same intention as well,
Yeah, yeah.
it can be very powerful and potent for that loosening of the artificial self, for the opening state, and even potentially for liberation itself.
Mm, yeah. Okay. So I think we can wrap that up. If there's any last message, you can say that. Otherwise, yeah, it's a goodbye.
Yeah, it's been good to connect with you and your viewers, Shivam. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. Okay. I have enjoyed it too, Christopher. Goodbye. See you
Goodbye.
again.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.